Okay, everybody ready? Thank you all so much for being here. You know, the last 24 hours have been very difficult for our community, and we have been grappling with this as a violent crime, a crime committed against a beautiful, tranquil community. Yeah, I just don't want it in my face. Thank you. So this community has responded in a really beautiful way, and we've been awaiting more information from law enforcement and from investigators. And one of the key pieces of the investigation, key determination was made earlier, and so I'm going to read from a statement. And we have several elected officials here, including my colleague from the House of Representatives, my vecina, my neighbor, Representative Xochitl Torres Small. We have city representatives, we have state representatives, county representatives, school district representatives, and community and faith leaders who are coming together, and we're going to go on a march, and we are then going to attend 2 different vigils. But we thought that the news that we received this morning was important. And so I'm going to read from the statement, and if anyone would like to comment, you're more than welcome to approach the podium or to answer questions. We are taking a moment from the time we've been spending with families and the community of El Paso to make a statement about the decision announced earlier today by United States Attorney John Bash, who confirmed that the Department of Justice would be investigating the massacre in our community as domestic terrorism. But before we do that, we must make some acknowledgments. First, again, we recognize the valor and quick response by local, state, and federal law enforcement, our firefighters, ambulance services, as well as the incredible work of doctors, nurses, techs, and all healthcare professionals in our community. Our first responders have saved more lives than I think any of us will ever understand. Second, we thank the heroes, the women and men who aren't with law enforcement, but who are civilians, who jumped in to save children, the elderly, and many others who benefited from their courage in those terrifying moments. There's no doubt that we will be hearing countless stories of heroism by everyday El Pasoans in the weeks to come. And finally, we thank the community. In El Paso, everyone is family. And when your family needs you, we are there. El Pasoans, from the moment that we learned of the horrific events, we have opened up our hearts and wrapped our arms around those who are in pain and who are suffering. Yesterday, today, tomorrow will be no different, and the weeks to come, that love and that comfort will continue. We encourage those who can make donations to visit the El Paso Community Foundation or the Paso del Norte Community Foundation web pages, where they have established victims relief funds. They are coordinating the financial support we'd all like to provide the families who have lost loved ones and families whose loved ones are recovering. El Paso is resilient and strong, and as long as there is someone in need, we will be there. Nothing ever will or ever can change that. But we would be remiss as a community if we did not address that determination by the Department of Justice regarding domestic terrorism. We are heartened that this has been recognized for what it is, a racially motivated terrorist attack on our safe and tranquil community. The shooter came into our community because we are an Hispanic community and because we have immigrants here. He came here to harm us. The Department of Justice and local law enforcement have identified this as being motivated by hate. And it is this hate that is at the root of much suffering in our country. And when we fail to call it out, we give it cover. There are deadly consequences to bigotry, racism, and hate. There are deadly consequences to dehumanizing our fellow human beings. Domestic terrorism is one of those deadly consequences, and we stand together in calling for actually all governments to hear the alarm being sounded by federal law enforcement about conspiracy theory-driven domestic extremists. Immediately, the government should instruct federal agencies and law enforcement to draft a national plan to deal with white supremacy and domestic terrorism for what it is, a national crisis. Support legislation and funding that would deal with the national emergency that is the gun violence epidemic, as well as the hate epidemic that is plaguing our country. El Paso is an incredible community. We have been safe for decades. Historically, El Paso has led the nation in desegregation and integration efforts. And during moments of crisis, we've demonstrated to the country how we treat strangers and the most vulnerable in our midst. We will continue to do this because we have chosen to face challenges with decency, strength, and love. We will continue to celebrate our diversity and come together in unity, especially during times of strife. We will persevere. And we have a request for our fellow Americans. If we are to honor the fallen, the survivors, not just those in El Paso, not just those in Ohio, and our hearts go out to them as well, but to all of the fallen and all of the survivors, their families, their communities, we can only do that by treating one another, everyone, every single one, with dignity and kindness. El Pasoans are doing that. We have done that. We will continue to do that. And we ask everyone to join us. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up in case any of my colleagues would like to make a statement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Congresswoman Escobar, and I want to especially recognize again the presence of Congresswoman Xochitl Torres Moll from Las Cruces. It's an honor to have you here with us. All I have to add to what was just said is that while we do need to recognize that people are grieving, that parents, even as we speak, are still waiting for the police to inform them over at the elementary school whether their loved ones were in fact killed or not. And while we have to come together and provide that support and respect that the families deserve from this community, as the Congresswoman said, we cannot let this moment, this momentous occasion, without calling out what needs to be called out. And she made reference to the fact that the FBI has concluded this is an act of domestic terrorism. While the FBI is saying that the president made comments today which did not include any reference to domestic terrorism, did not include any reference to white supremacy, to the increasing racism in this country. We also had one of our state leaders in one of the cable networks this morning attributing this violence to video games, social media, and mental health concerns. Nobody wants to talk about gun violence prevention measures. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that we need to do something, as was just articulated, about the increasing racism in this country, the danger that that poses to the security of this country, not to mention the danger it poses to the safety and well-being of communities like El Paso. So what needs to be done? I think we just laid out some of those measures, but I say that at least at the state level, we need support from the communities across the state on insisting that we pass common sense gun violence prevention laws, like the red flag law, protective order bill that I introduced, but which didn't even get a hearing, like which by the way would take away guns and deny access to guns to those who have a history of violence or have demonstrated violence or threats to themselves or to others. Measures like increasing the penalties for leaving guns lying around in the house and children picking them up and killing themselves or killing other children. None of these common sense measures were addressed by the Texas legislature. We didn't get hearings. On the other hand, I want to tell you that there were a whole slew of bills that were championed by the state leadership, those in the majority, those in control of the legislature, that now allow, for example, guns in your churches, guns in church, that allow more guns on campuses, oddly enough. Teachers being armed, school marshals being armed, carrying weapons openly instead of concealed, as has been the law up to this point. And I could go on about 10 or other so measures that make it easier for Texans to have access to guns in all types of locations. So I call for our community and others across this state to hold accountable elected officials at all levels, both in the House and the Senate of the state capitol, to do something about this gun violence culture that we have, this culture of violence that we have in this country. And also this culture of rising racism and white supremacy. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm State Senator Jose Rodriguez, representing Senate District 29, which is El Paso County, Hudspeth, Culberson, Presidio, and Jeff Davis counties.
Hi, I'm Peter Schwartzbein. I'm the City Council representative for District 1 here in the city of El Paso. I think the Congresswoman and the Senator bring up a lot of very valid points that we need to take into account on this day of mourning when our entire community, whether it's in Mexico, West Texas, or southern New Mexico, are now grieving for these victims of what is hate and a hate crime. I'm the son of immigrants and the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. I've seen firsthand and heard stories from my grandmother about what the power of hate and racism can bring to a country and to a society. And I learned very clearly the story that never again should we accept intolerance and accept racism and understand that words have an impact in this world. How we speak to each other and how we listen to each other makes an impact. And so there's a lot of reasons with what occurred here yesterday. But one thing we can't forget is that what this is. It's domestic terrorism fueled by vile, white nationalist, xenophobic discourse. It's white nationalist terrorism. And I challenge this country and our federal government to approach this scourge of domestic terrorism fueled by white supremacy and white nationalism with the same fervor that they went after Al-Qaeda and they went after ISIS. Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Charleston, Poway, and now El Paso. It needs to stop. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Xochitl Torres Small. I represent New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. And sí, somos vecinos. And I want to thank Congresswoman Escobar for her clarity in action amidst the sorrow and heartbreak and anger, because we need to act as one community. Sunland Park Anthony, Chaparral, and Las Cruces share many things with El Paso. We share family and friends. We share workplaces. We share this sorrow, and we share this call to action. This call to act against domestic terrorism, this call to act against hate wherever it hides, and this call to stand together. Thank you.
If there are any questions, I'd be glad to have a little bit of time before the vigil and the march to address any questions that you all might have.
Congresswoman, the president's Twitter account deleted several tweets today that referenced the word invasion in regards to the border. What's your response to that?
It's a shocking first step, but a welcome first step. I am hoping that that is an indicator that he recognizes that his words have power. His words have power. And just as I said earlier, there are consequences to those words. You know, we have long had a battle in this country with racism. All over the globe, we're seeing nationalism and isolationism take root everywhere. And so it is up to leaders to bring people together, to ease people's concerns, and to make sure that people understand that they don't have to fear someone who looks different or is different or speaks a different language or comes from a different place. And when there are leaders who dehumanize those who are different, those who look different, speak different, love someone different, when you take the humanity away from someone, it makes evil actions that much easier, because you're committing an act against someone you think is not human. And so that is encouraging, and I would ask that he reflect on everything that he has done and said, reflect on the fact that hate crimes have increased significantly over the last 2 years. I would also call on those who use mental illness as an excuse to please stop. Please stop. It further stigmatizes those who truly suffer from mental illness. And the fact of the matter is, people with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violent crime and not perpetrators of violent crime. It is about time, and I hope that this tragedy is not in vain if we can finally have a reckoning in this country as to what is really going on, so that we can look at ourselves in the mirror and face the truth, so that we can take the appropriate actions that will save lives. You know, there is always much criticism for people who in a moment of tragedy want to talk about the why and how we solve problems. That absolutely should be a part of the conversation. It is not too soon to have those conversations. It is too late to have those conversations. We don't want any more families planning any more funerals. The House of Representatives passed 2 bipartisan common sense gun laws, and they are laying at the doorstep of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I would go back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow for an assault weapon ban and for more legislation that we need. That assault weapon has no business being in neighborhoods or in communities. He bought that legally in a state that has some of the weakest gun laws in the country. I would be glad to go back tomorrow. I think the Senate needs to act on what we have provided first. I saw on Twitter that the Senate Majority Leader offered his condolences. I appreciate that. We welcome those condolences. We are thankful for them, but it's time for action. Again, it's not too soon, it's too late. En español, es importante entender que lo que anunció el gobierno federal ahora fue que vamos a tener una investigación diferente. Y ya están empezando una investigación para terrorismo doméstico. Y la verdad es que este crimen Tenemos 20 personas muertas por el odio y el racismo. Y le doy las gracias a las personas que hicieron la decisión, porque para tener justicia necesitamos reconocer la verdad del racismo, el modo que hablamos uno con otro, el modo que tratamos a gente. Y con reconocer eso podemos empezar con las soluciones para prevenir otra tragedia como la que tenemos hoy en El Paso. Yes. Really, it's as I mentioned, in the House of Representatives, we have offered up legislation that we have passed on a bipartisan basis, common sense gun safety reform. There were efforts in in state government. I would encourage our governor, who flew all the way here yesterday to offer his condolences, to examine what is happening in his state and why. And I am certain that state legislators would gladly come in for a special session in order to address it. One last question.
Just beyond our call to action for thoughts and prayers, what is our call to action as a minority in this country, as a minority in the state of Texas, and a minority in the Senate? What can we do?
Now I have to be careful. I have the official podium here, because believe me, there's a lot we can do and that we should do next year in 2020 that starts now. But you know, I will tell you, really fundamentally, we have to treat people with dignity. When immigrants are seen as less than human, when minorities are seen as less than human, then that's what makes violence possible. That's the breeding ground for it. And so it is, thank you. Really the central call to action today is to lead with love. That is the lesson El Paso learned long ago. The lesson that El Paso learned long ago is that we lead with love. In the face of hate, in the face of oppression, in the face of fear and pain, we lead with love. That's what this community knows. That's what would heal this country. Thank you all. We have a vigil to get to. Thank you for being here.
Get in your seat.